Hi, and welcome to the 5 steps of U.S. study. We're specifically talking about undergraduate admissions today. I'm Jenica Heim, your Education USA advisor. Education USA is funded by the U.S. Department of State. We have advisors like myself all over the world. I help out all the students across Canada. We provide free advising services, and that ranges from one-on-one advising to larger group sessions such as this. I run boot camps on things like SAT and the Common App. And speaking of that, I promised you some pop-ups. My next SAT boot camp is coming up in next month. I tried to time it with as many March breaks as possible. It will be the week of March, I believe it's March 15th, when Ontario is having their break, Quebec, a few of the provinces. If you can't make it, you can still sign up and you will receive recordings afterwards, so you can still get the information. All events with Education USA are free. There's never any charge for these boot camps and webinars. During the summer, I run a Common App boot camp. I do a lot of updates on social media. The one that I am most active on is Instagram. So I always encourage people to follow me there. Again, we've got one more pop-up coming at you quickly. So here's the information to join my Instagram. I do Tuesday tips at 4 p.m. every Tuesday. And I do webinars just like this one, and you can learn more on educationusacanada.ca. Marwan just let me know that the Ontario break just moved to April. So thank you for that info. I'll maybe create another boot camp around that period of time. I'll see if other provinces are following suit, and then I'll adjust as needed. I know March break is a good period to do it's a 5-session boot camp, so it's a good time for it. Thank you for that info. All right, so why study in the US? There's quite a few of you here today, so you can go ahead and put in the chat, what are some reasons that you might be thinking about applying to US universities and hopefully studying in the United States? And you can give me reasons, or you could also give me schools that maybe you're interested in applying to if you've thought that far ahead. I'm curious what our group is looking at. Marcus, I think that Marwan was saying that the March break in Ontario was moved into April, and I just hadn't seen that news yet, so I might adjust my SAT boot camp schedule. All right, Eleanor is looking at soccer scholarships. Brooke's hoping for Houston. We've talked about that. Ella wants to apply to University of Hawaii. Nice. Samantha's looking for travel opportunities. Great. Ivy wants to learn. Yes, okay, great. So studying abroad, but not being too far away in another place that speaks English. I see a few people looking at sports scholarships, looking at new opportunities. Awesome, I love to see all these different reasons. Fabulous. So here's some reasons that I found when I've connected with students. Some people are looking at highly selective universities in the US. So if you're one of those folks, feel free to shout out one of those kind of dream schools that you might be aiming towards. Also a number of competitive athletes. So I saw already in the chat, some of you looking to go to the NCAA. Yeah, so Boomy's looking at NYU. That would count as one of those highly selective schools for sure. Specialized programs. Maybe you're an artist, or you're a dancer, or somebody who's looking at something that's really specialized, like a technology school, something like that. There's so many options in the US. If there's anyone here from Quebec, or just anyone who's an English language learner, it's a great place to improve your English. And of course, there's so many benefits to studying abroad, which some of you already put there in the chat. Great, I see a lot of people interested in those Ivy League schools. Yep, quite a few Ivy Leagues in the chat there. Here's just a few stats. We won't kind of go into depth into all of them, but I always just like to show people that Canada is the 5th largest sender of students into the United States. So there's tons of Canadians studying in the US, and at the undergraduate level, it's around 12,000 or so. And a lot of those people are athletes. So you're in good company if you're an athlete. A lot of you go down to the States. But if you're not, of course, there's plenty of people who don't engage in athletics who also go down. OPT is your opportunity to stay and work after you graduate. It's called optional practical training time, and a lot of students do take advantage of that opportunity as well. So we are going to start with step 1 of the 5 steps, which is researching your options. So hopefully we've got a lot of grade 10, grade 11 students here today, and this is exactly the time to be researching your options. So how do you go about doing that with US schools? First and foremost, you want to think about what major might you want to study. And you would do the same process with any university you're thinking of in Canada, in Europe, or beyond. I have to stop for a second because Parmajit just shouted out UC Davis. I actually went to UC Davis. I'm from California. That's my alma mater. So I try not to pick favorites, but go Aggies. All right, get back to the major. So when you're looking at major for the US, there's more than 4,700 colleges and universities in the US. It's a lot of schools. So oftentimes I'll get the question from people, oh, what's a school with a great biology major? Well, I mean, there's hundreds. And so major is always a great place to start, but oftentimes you'll need to narrow things down further than that. There's also specialty majors where there might not be as many available in Canada. We've got here musical theater or aviation pictured, and these are majors that are not as widely available at Canadian universities, and that can really attract students down to the US. And even though you want that very specific major, you might be surprised to find there's actually hundreds of schools with a musical theater major. So when it comes to the US, major is a good place to start, but usually you need to think of other things to help you narrow down your search that are also important to you and your university experience. So what are those things? Location. Do you want to live kind of nearby to where you already are? Do you want to travel far away? Do you want to be in a city? Do you want to be somewhere rural? So really start thinking about how much location is important to you. Sometimes it's not important to everybody, but sometimes it's important to be able to travel home easily. Maybe that means being able to drive or be close to an airport that has direct flights to, say, your hometown. You should also think of the size of campus. Some campuses are humongous. I've got a picture here of one of the largest public institutions on the left-hand side, and then I have a picture on the right-hand side of one of the smallest public institutions because it's very specialized, only a few hundred students at the John Jay College. So when you have smaller schools, you have smaller class sizes. You also usually have more specialized majors. If you have a larger campus, you have way more activities, bigger student life, the big game atmosphere. So you can start to think about what size of campus is going to best suit your needs. Because there's so many opportunities, you can also really be thinking about campus and nearby activities. So for example, if you're somebody who really loves skiing on the weekends and you want that really good biology major and you want small class sizes, I can help you find a university that can help you fit your needs. So those are all some various things you can start thinking about. Then you can jot down anything that you think you must have or that you just would want, but you're flexible on. And you put those in 2 different columns. And you can use the website collegeboard.org to help you start searching for various institutions. You should be talking to your guidance counselor, and you can work with me as well. As I mentioned, free service. So feel free to follow up with questions you have. Review university websites and social media. Sign up for university perspective lists. So basically any school you're interested in on their website, you can sign up for an email list and they'll let you know of any events that they have coming up. Because everything is virtual right now, there's tons of live events where people are doing campus visits, but like a virtual campus visit, virtual preview days, things like that. Definitely attend any university you're interested in, attend one of those events. Some schools in the US do what's called demonstrated interest. Not all of them do, but what that means is they do track if you've joined this list, if you've attended an event. and just shown that like you actually are interested in learning more about the school and attending it. All right, so is a live. I am live right now. I think the reason you can pause it is because it's a webinar. So I think when you pause it, you probably then after that, you're just watching the recording that I'm doing. I don't know. I didn't know that was a feature. Pretty cool. So then once you start having an idea of some schools you want to apply to, it's usually a good idea to get your list narrowed down to like 8 to 10 schools. And you should be able to sort them into categories. So earlier we saw on our chat there some dream schools like Harvard, NYU, Yale, Stanford, right? So any school that has less than a 15% admit rate definitely needs to go into that dream school category. And we don't want all the schools we're applying to be in the dream school category. You need to also consider schools in the target category, which would be ones that have maybe an acceptance rate more in that like 50 to 20% area. And then your sure bets are ones that based on your academics and everything that you know about yourself and your profile, that you know pretty well that you would get into that school. If you're really just targeting US universities, you should have at least one Canadian school in your sure bet category as a fallback plan in case the US schools don't work out for any reason. Step 2 was really step 1.5, because you need to think about financing your studies while you're applying to US schools. So the main way that students fund their studies is through the university that they'll be attending. So university financial aid has multiple categories. One is merit scholarships, and those are scholarships based on grades, test scores. Could also be other things like leadership, depends on the school, what their parameters are. Another category is needs-based grants. And so some schools might have one or the other. They might do both or neither for international students. It really depends on the school. Needs-based grants are based on your family's income and other financial measures. There are 63 US universities that meet full demonstrated need, and that includes the 8 Ivy League universities. You can see a proud student at Harvard here, Guillaume, who I worked with. So Harvard, of course, meets full demonstrated need, and he's a student who's making good use of that policy. And that brings us into the work study. So typically, if you're a student who's getting a generous amount of financial need-based grants from a school, you might also be part of a work study program, which is where you need to put in a certain amount of hours of work at an institution in order to receive some money towards your study. And then lastly, talent scholarships. So many schools will give scholarships for athletes or for people in the arts, performing arts or fine arts. So if you're in either of those areas, then you want to check into those opportunities. So those are the main ways that you could receive financial aid at a university. Financial aid is an umbrella term for any money a university would give you. So that's all what we call gift aid. The other kind of aid is loans. If you're not a citizen of the United States, then you are not eligible to apply for loans in the United States. As you can see further down the list here, you could take out loans at a Canadian bank, and you can also take out your provincial government loans. So if you're in Ontario, that would be OSAP. If you're in Alberta, I believe that's Alberta Student Aid. So each province has their own aid system where you can apply for loans and sometimes scholarships as well. I know in Alberta, the Rutherford Scholarship is an example of one of your provincial scholarships you can take with you to the United States. There are not any big external scholarships you can apply for to go as a Canadian down to the US, unfortunately. It's just not really something that exists. So really, if you're looking for financial aid, if you're looking for scholarships, finding generous universities is really the best first step you should be taking, which is why it's really an important part of that research process. I've got a great question that just came in here. Are there any universities where you can study medicine after high school? Unfortunately, no. In the United States, you need to go into a 4-year bachelor's program before you can go into a medical program. And yes, I'm going to be going over admissions requirements here on the next slide. And Luis is asking how much does scholarships cover in percentages? It really, really depends on the institution. So I have seen students receive full scholarships. The instances where that happens are either when they are star athletes or they are students who have a high amount of need, who have gotten into one of these selective universities that provide full demonstrated need to students who need it. Otherwise, you're usually looking at more of a partial scholarship, and it can range pretty widely from school to school. So we're going to talk now about completing your application. Someone just asked about Harvard's application process specifically, so I'll kind of refer to that throughout here as well. So application requirements vary incredibly from institution to institution because there's a wide amount of selectivity of schools in the United States. I already said, there's close to 5,000 institutions, so it's a lot. So basically your least selective institutions, the ones that are going to take the majority of students who apply, typically you're only going to need to do an application, submit a fee, and submit official transcripts. Every school you apply to will require those things, and some will even not have a fee or waive a fee. Your official transcripts need to be from grade 9 until where you are now, and it needs to include every institution you've been in. So if you're a student from Quebec, that means your high school and your cégep. If you're a student who's taken some courses at your local college, you need to make sure there's transcripts from that college. If you took summer classes somewhere outside of your school, those transcripts also need to be part of your application package. U.S. universities do look at all your grades, grade 9 until grade 11, beginning of grade 12 for some institutions. And so it's important that you get all those transcripts in, and that if you're somebody who's starting early, you're aware that all those transcripts will be sent. It does mean that, they're not going to look at grade 9 as heavily as grade 11. It's a bit more important the more recent schooling you've done. And this is also part of the holistic process. So a lot of other schools will add in other measures besides just your grades. And so some of the other things you may encounter, and I'm just going to let you know on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about Covet. So I'm going to talk about right now kind of like normal requirements, and then I'm going to talk about some adjustments from Covet on the next page. So standardized tests, a lot of schools require either an SAT or an ACT. They're very similar to each other, and you never have to take both. Oftentimes students will choose one based on what's closest to them. There's a lot of students in Ottawa here today, and only the SATs offered in Ottawa, so it kind of makes the choice for you. Saw a couple students in Sherbrooke. Sherbrooke has an ACT, so maybe that's a better choice for you. But if you have the opportunity to choose, you can always take practice tests of either and decide which one could be a good fit for you. If you're a non-native English speaker, then you do need to take an English language exam. TOEFL, IELTS, and Duolingo are the most commonly accepted English language exams. So that would be my French speakers from Quebec, or if you are new to Canada and you haven't been learning in English for longer than a year or two, then you would also need to take one of these exams. Recommendation letters. So some schools will say they want 1, some want 2, some want 3. Some will allow you to even add a couple optional letters up to 5. Usually that's 1 from your guidance counselor and 2 from teachers. And those letters should be from people who know you really well and can say really, really nice things about you. Essays and writing supplements. So in the US process, you usually write 1 generalized essay that goes to a lot of the schools you're applying to, and then writing supplements where you write more specialized essays for each institution, like why do you want to go to this school? Things like that. Interviews, some schools have interviews. Oftentimes they're not required. They're usually optional. Oftentimes they're with alumni. They're usually just a really great opportunity to learn more about the school and for the school to learn a little bit more about you. And then there's other optional things you typically can attach to your application. Things like a resume, maybe a video, maybe a research abstract. It depends school to school how many additional things they would allow you to attach. The most important thing is when something's optional, you don't have to do it. You know, if you don't have a research abstract, for example, because you didn't do research, it doesn't mean you have to come up with one. It's just giving you an option that if you've done that, that's something you can attach. If you're an art student, an audition or portfolio is usually pretty integral to your success in the process. But even if you aren't applying for a program in the arts and you are an artist kind of on the side, oftentimes schools will give you the option to attach in a portfolio. Yanni's asking what an attached video would be about. So some schools might ask for a brief video interview. Some schools allow you, like if you're a maker, like you're somebody who's made something like in their garage in engineering and you want to share a video of that thing. So there's different ways that a video could be incorporated. Again, if it's something that you've already accomplished, and not all schools have this requirement or option as part of it. All right. The COVID-19 changes. So I'm going to talk about this and then I'll go back over your questions because I know several of those questions were about COVID-19 related things. So those were the general requirements that I went over, and now I'm going to go over some of the changes. So the biggest one is really when it comes to standardized testing. A lot of universities made the SAT or ACT optional this last year for their students because of COVID-19 and having reduced access to testing. Not all schools have decided what they're doing for 2022 grads yet, but most of the Ivy League universities have come forward and said that they will make it optional for another year. So there's schools that are starting to say that they will continue with the optional policy since the access to these exams looks like it's going to continue to be reduced over the next few months here. So you do want to just keep an eye on any school that you're interested in and see what their policy is going to be. We don't kind of have a really good overlook yet on how widespread people are going to maintain those test optional policies. The website fairtest.org does a really good job on tracking schools' testing policies, and they were already doing that before COVID. There was like 200 to 300 schools that were already test optional, and then it went up to like 2,000 or so after, with COVID. So they've been doing a good job. They're the best resource to look into that, but you always want to look at the university's website to double check the information's up to date. Couple other big updates that happened recently. The SAT used to have an optional essay that has been discontinued as of a couple weeks ago in January. The ACT still has an optional essay, but no word yet on whether or not they're going to get rid of theirs, but who knows, maybe they'll follow suit with the SAT. The SAT subject tests were also discontinued. In the United States, they were discontinued immediately. In Canada, they're still going to be offered up until June. So if you signed up for it, you can still take it if you want to, but they've also said that you can request your money back if you've decided you do not want to take it. That's really up to you. Considering it's been discontinued, we can make some assumptions that the universities are going to have to adjust their policies to really reduce the impact of an SAT subject test. So that, again, that's up to you if you've signed up, whether or not you want to follow up. If you do need to take an English language exams, those are widely being offered online, which is really, really useful. The SAT and ACT, you still have to go on location to take those tests for now. The SAT mentioned that they will have some updates in April. Jordana, an SAT subject test was a 1-hour exam on a very specific subject like biology or math or US history, scaled score out of 800, and a lot of selective universities wanted you to take 2 of those in the past. So now those are just They disappeared. They're gone. They don't exist anymore. So that's really nice that you don't have to worry about that particular extra piece of testing. The other things you can expect on the Common App, a 250 words optional essay where you can write about the impact of COVID in your life. You don't have to write this essay. It's also not just about COVID. It's also about any other, if you've sustained any other natural disasters. So, you know, if you're in an area that was impacted by wildfire or something like that, that also counts in this space. And lastly, the guidance counselors. They have been asked to note any curriculum changes in their report. So if you've been worried about, you know, my school changed to octomesters, how is the university going to know about that? It's really up to your guidance counselor. They're the ones who report the information about how your school gives grades so that the admissions officer knows how to read your card. So Diane, the SAT tests and the ACT tests still exist. The one that doesn't exist anymore is the subject tests, okay? So that these are separate exams. It's the subject tests that don't exist anymore. So Skyly is asking if there's still COVID at the time of the test, how will we take it? So some centers are staying open and they're just really having a lot of safety protocols. So hand sanitizer, wearing masks, spaced out desks. Things like they probably have students taking the test in a large gym space with the desks far apart from each other. So it's up to each testing center how they want to give the test to make sure that they are keeping students safe. Okay, let's see what else was asked. Is Physics 30 in Calgary required for medical school? So Brooke, when students apply for medical school in the United States, the courses that will be required are just what they studied in undergrad. The high school courses no longer matter at that point. Can you explain more about this year's test? Yeah, I already did. If I attend grad as opposed to doing it for, do I still need to complete the SATs or ACTs? Samantha, if you're looking to go to graduate school, there's a whole other set of tests that you get to take for graduate school. So the general one that a lot of universities require is called the GRE, or if you're doing something more specialized profession, there's other tests for that. So lawyers take the LSAT, aspiring business people take the GMAT, doctors, the MCAT, right? So there's a lot of different tests. Basically, almost any student entering grad school in the United States has a standardized test they would need to take. And Serena asks, how does living in Canada, even when being a US citizen, affect the admission rate? So Serena, that's really hard to make a general statement about. You know, universities pride themselves on looking at each individual applicant. As a US citizen, you would be considered a US citizen abroad as opposed to like a Canadian. And for some schools, that could potentially improve your chances if they just have a smaller percentage of overall of international students. But there's no kind of one rule fits all for institutions. And Skyly asks, what's graduate school? So good question. We're talking about undergraduate admission. So basically after high school, when you go and get either a bachelor's degree or your first degree after high school, that's called an undergraduate degree. You need an undergraduate degree to then do professional studies, get a master's degree or a PhD. This is called graduate school. So you can't enter graduate school until you have a bachelor's degree. So that's the progression of studies. Yeah, great question. Important to back up and give that information. And Asha asked, do you think there is a disadvantage if you opt out of the SAT? So Asha, I think what's really important is that when universities say something is optional, they truly mean it. And they're not like secretly docking students points behind the scenes for not adding something in. This year, and a lot of universities are starting to publish information about how many people took the SAT. And for plenty of universities, about half the students who applied didn't send an SAT or ACT score. And it's just been real lack of access. There's been so many cancellations. I know any of you who are in the Toronto area, basically all my Toronto students last year, March through December, they had six tests canceled on them, and in the end none of them could submit scores because they had no opportunities to take the test. So yeah, you're not penalized in any way for not being able to access an SAT. Now, if you have access to one and you think you could do a really good job on it and you want to take it, then go ahead. But if you're not required to, then you definitely don't need to do it, and you can spend your time on other worthwhile activities and extracurriculars. So Skyly, yes, a medical school or a law school is graduate school. That would be, you can only enter into those schools after you've completed a bachelor's degree. And those would be considered professional programs. So what's your application timeline? Students who are looking, if you're a grade 11 student or if you're in Quebec and you're in your first year of Cégep, basically now is a great time to be researching, doing that step 1, that step 2, and then in the summer you can start thinking about opening your applications, and applications open August 1st. So that's really when you can start filling out information and start preparing and applying to US schools. Some schools have early application deadlines available. You don't have to apply early, but if you want to, as early as October 15th through November 1st is when most early applications are. Some regular applications are as early as November as well. You can see a student pictured here goes to University of California. Their deadlines are for all students. They don't have an early deadline. All students, the deadline's November 30th. So that's a pretty early, just regular deadline. If you do apply for an early admissions, you receive a decision around mid-December. So that's one of the advantages to early admissions, is just getting an earlier response from the school. Your early admissions decision can be either accepted, declined, or deferred. And deferred means that they'll look at you again with the regular admission students. This last year, there was a huge number of people who applied early to many institutions. So a lot of students, especially at Harvard, I heard a lot of students were just deferred to the regular process just due to such a large volume. Those who apply in the regular process, for a lot of schools, those deadlines are around January 1st. You get a decision around the end of March or beginning of April, and then you need to make your decision by May 1st in the US. So the group that this is targeted for is mostly grade 11. So this timeline would be a grade 11 timeline going into grade 12 next year. And any other student who's kind of thinking about studying in the US. For grade 12s, there's still some options. So if you're a grade 12 student, there's still some options to apply to the US. There's some schools that do rolling admission. So there's plenty that still have deadlines available in the next few months. And there's also schools like community colleges. So if you go to the Study Go Abroad event, there's definitely some schools that have deadlines still open for the fall. Your window just gets narrower and narrower the longer you wait to apply. And then also if you're looking for any scholarships or financial aid, usually the earlier you apply as an international student, the more likely it is you'll receive funding. Yanni asks, if you apply early action and are deferred, can you update your application? Yes, you absolutely can. So you can, once you apply, you get access to a student portal where you can make any updates that you would like. And also your guidance counselor will be asked to include a mid-year report once your semester grades are out. So this is the time of year right now when guidance counselors complete those mid-year reports and update the grades. And the student should be also updating with anything they've accomplished in the meantime. All right. I'm going to keep rolling, and I'm going to take some of these questions at the end. Joyanne, the advantage to applying early is that you get an earlier decision from the school on whether or not you're in. So if you get in early, then for a lot of students, they only applied to that one place. And instead of having to apply to 10 universities, if you chose your top choice school, you applied there early and you get in, that's all your work and it's done and you're in school and you get to put it all away. So that's really the biggest advantage, is just getting in early and not having to pay those additional fees to all those other universities and all that. Zachary asks, can you submit an early application and then apply normally to the same school you got declined with the early application? No. So in the same cycle, if you don't get in, if you're declined, then you can't apply again during that same admission cycle. And Skyly's asking about letters of continued interest. So yes, if you are deferred in the early process and they look at you again in regular, you can write a letter to the institution and say that you are still interested in attending, and then also include any updates in that particular letter. Okay. Awesome. We're going to keep moving. Step 4, if you're a Canadian citizen, this is actually the absolute easiest step, because Canadian citizens don't need to apply for a student visa to study in the United States. So what happens is you get a form from the school called the I-20. You still are going to have the same restrictions as any other international student. Typically an F1 is the visa category. You're still considered an F1 student. But you don't have to go and apply for the visa. All you need is the I-20, your Canadian passport. You take those with you over the border, and that's it. Right now, Canadian students can cross the border, even with COVID. I know there's currently border restrictions for visitors, but for students, you can go to your institution without a problem, even with the border closure. And so, you know, in general, the process hasn't changed at all, and it's pretty straightforward. Step 5, which we won't go over today, is preparing to depart. So if there's anybody in the group who's actually gotten into a U.S. university and would like just more information about the next steps in preparing to leave, I do a webinar around May, June, where we go over those things. So do feel free to stay in touch with me to get that information once I have it published. I'm going to give a little more information for athletes. So there's a few athletes here in the group. There are several athletic leagues in the US that give scholarships, most notably NCAA Division I or Division II. Each institution has their own website that you should take note of. There are a few leagues that also exist that don't have scholarships, like club sports or NCAA Division III. I'll talk a little bit more about what's needed for NCAA Division I and II, because those have the strictest requirements. Again, you can review those requirements at ncaa.org. You'll need to complete the 16 core courses that are listed here, and you need to maintain at least a 2.3 grade point average in those subjects. I'm very happy to help people create a core course GPA. So if you would like more information on that, you can absolutely email me afterwards. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now, but you'll have it on the last slide as well. So you can contact me. I'm happy to help you create a GPA so you know where you're at in the NCAA process and which of your courses are eligible towards those 16 core courses, because not all of your classes count, and it really depends on what province you're in, on how many credits they're worth, and blah, blah, blah. If as early as grade 9, 10, definitely if you're in grade 11, you should be reaching out to coaches to be recruited. Right now, it's already getting pretty late for a grade 11 student, particularly for Division I. A lot of coaches make their decisions pretty early on for scholarship athletes. If you're not looking for athletic scholarships, then you still have more opportunities ahead of you. But if you're looking for money, you always want to get started as early as possible. And then the other thing the NCAA looks for is that you maintain your amateur status. It's pretty important. And lastly, if you're interested in some short-term programs, I'm going to bring up a couple great things for you to consider. The Youth Ambassadors Program. So in the past, this was a 3-week exchange to the US. This year, it will be taking place virtually. Because of that, I don't have any details of the program yet, particularly the length. It will be happening this summer. I'm assuming it won't be 3 weeks. But basically, if you're a Canadian citizen, you can apply. You need to be not graduating high school this year. So this is for students typically grades 9 through 11. If you are in Montreal, if you're in first year of CEGEP, you would be able to apply as well. If you're interested in this, just make sure that you stay in touch with me. To log into this webinar, you had to say if you wanted to hear back from EdUSA. So if you said yes, you'll get information when this program opens. If you didn't, then go ahead and send me your email address and I will let you know when the program opens. It is affiliated with the US Department of State. So one of the cool things about it is you do become a US government alum when you participate in this program. You're learning about leadership and you need to implement a community service project when it's over. So if you're someone who loves community service, this could be a really great program for you. Another one is if you're currently enrolled in a Canadian university, or if you are going to enroll in a Canadian university, consider taking a semester abroad in the United States. So I'm going to go ahead and throw up another offer. So this is where you can find more information about the Killam Fellowship. I work at the Fulbright office, and Killam is one of our programs, so I'm very familiar with this one. It's a $5,000 scholarship to study abroad for a semester in the United States. Super cool program. Obviously, this last year, a lot of people did their exchanges virtually, so that was still an option. So I do recommend, if it's interesting to you, apply. And we've been as flexible as possible with students to try to make this happen for them, whether or not they actually physically are able to go. So something to bear in mind. And we will now transition into questions. Please stay in touch, as I mentioned. If you'd like to have a meeting with me, like I've said, everything with Education USA is free. So you can fill out, I believe the link here is to my pre-advising survey. So you fill out the pre-advising survey so I can learn a little bit more about you. And then at the end, you can choose a date and time for a Zoom advising session with me. So do feel free to do that if you'd like to chat further. And I'm happy to take a sip of water and answer some of your questions. Okay. So Eleanor is asking about career websites. Great question. So I have a few links that I can send you. I wouldn't know them off the top of my head. So Eleanor, I do suggest that you follow up by email with that question, and I would be happy to send you over a few links about kind of like finding a career and like just some websites that have some really fun questionnaires about learning about what some of your strengths are. So yeah, I can definitely send that to you. And somebody asked what a GPA is. So a GPA is short for grade point average. In the United States, most universities use a 4.0 scale. So like an A is a 4, a B is a 3, so on and so forth. For athletes, you have to have a GPA, you create a GPA with your 16 core courses. That's like part of the process. But for a lot of students, you don't really need anything related to that. You would just, the university looks at your grades as they are on your transcript. If they need a GPA out of 4.0, they usually make it themselves. And if they don't make it themselves, but they need one, they will require you to pay another person to do it. That's called the transcript evaluator. And so if you need a transcript evaluator, they need to be certified by NACES, transcript evaluators. So don't do that unless you need to. Most universities won't require this, but there are definitely some that do. So just cross that bridge if you come to it. So Serena, you're asking about weighted or unweighted GPAs. So most Canadians don't have GPAs. So the answer to your question is they're going to look at your transcript as it is, which probably won't have a GPA. Where can I find details about universities that don't need SAT scores? So Sanvi, as I was saying earlier, you can check out fairtest.org. They're one of the best sites that's trying to keep track of who's test optional. But the universities are changing day to day right now on whether or not they're going to be test optional for 2022. So it's hard to know. It's hard to know unless you look at the actual website of the school and see if they've made an announcement. I would say get on the prospective student list of any school you're interested in, and then you'll receive an email from that school as well. Lewis is asking if admission is only based on academic or athletic merits, does it help to have the economic means? Yes, Luis, it always helps to have economic means. So let's go back to those needs-based schools. So some of those schools are needs aware, and if you're an international student applying to a needs aware institution, you might be a little more likely to get in if you can pay the full tuition. It is hard as an international student to get highly generous scholarship dollars. Those are very, very competitive. So the more you're able to pay out of pocket yourself, the less you're competing for those highly competitive merit or needs-based scholarships. So yes, of course. Like I said, I have, of course, met students and worked with students who have really generous scholarships to U.S. institutions, but they are, they tend to have some sort of exceptional talent or or academic merits that kind of really set them apart from other students. Sherilyn asks how needs blind works. So needs blind schools, and there's only 6 schools that are needs blind for Canadians, and that's going to be 4 Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and University of Pennsylvania. University of Pennsylvania is needs blind for Canadian and Mexican citizens, but no other international students. And then Amherst College and MIT. And then also I believe Minerva Schools is needs blind. Basically, Sherilyn, what it means is that during the admissions process, a needs blind school will take in any student that they want, and then the financial aid will determine how much that student needs, and the admissions team doesn't know that during the process at all, and that school will be able to meet all the needs of the students they've accepted. A needs aware school is one that will meet all students' need who are accepted, but they're also aware on whether or not you have that need. And the reason for that is the domestic students will all be needs blind, and they're going to prioritize more meeting the domestic student needs than the international students. And that's just the hard truth that, as an international student, you might have just some fewer scholarship opportunities than the domestic students. Skyly's asking, when do we take the SAT or ACT? So I would suggest if you're a grade 11 student looking at taking a March or May exam. March is pretty soon, so if you haven't planned for March, then May would be a good timeline. And then if things are pretty touch and go here with COVID, then you might want to look at one of the earlier testings in the fall. So there's one at the end of August. That might be a really good choice. It's not open to register for that one yet, but I would say pay attention to those registration dates and jump on that right away if you're looking at the for the fall. All right. Let me scoot back and make sure I'm Serena's asking, when they calculate the GPA, do they incorporate the difficulty of the courses? Yes. So if a school does create a GPA, then they typically will create a weighted GPA. The classes that are weighted are AP classes or IB classes. If you don't know what I'm saying, and your school doesn't have either of those, then you're just taking regular classes, and those will not be weighted. Maya asked, just to confirm, someone would apply in August before starting grade 12. So Maya, the applications will open in August before your grade 12 year that you can start inputting the information. But the deadlines aren't until throughout your grade 12 year. It just depends on what schools you're applying to. The most common deadline, regular deadline, is around January 1st during your grade 12 year. So yeah, what I was saying is that you can start completing the information as early as August 1st. Okay, trying to scroll back. If I missed one of your questions, if you can pop it back in. Okay, there we go. Parmajat asks, what's your advice for a 9th grader? So I would say for a 9th grader, really what you should be considering is first academics, making sure that you're doing well in school and that you're trying to take the most rigorous course load that you can while also doing well and creating a balance for yourself. Don't simply take all the hard classes and overload yourself. Pick and choose the ones where you know you'll be successful, push yourself, and balance out your academics and put yourself on a really nice track to make sure you're excelling all the way through to grade 12. You also need to be looking at your activities, and we didn't talk about that a lot today, and I know people usually have questions about extracurriculars. So during that holistic process, your awards, achievements, activities, these things are all part of your application, and it's important that you're able to have a robust report in that area. So you can start getting involved in different activities, and you want to work your way up to leadership roles. You want to get involved in your community as much as you can. You want to try to create achievements in the places that you do already excel at. So those are the sorts of things you can be looking at. Grade 9, you can start building those blocks in order to be able to get to achieve higher as you get into grade 11 and 12. Jordana, yes, you can take the SAT more than once. Absolutely. Absolutely. Olucias, if you're an American citizen, are you considered domestic or international? So all American citizens are domestic, no matter where you live. You are just going to be an American citizen educated abroad. So that means you will have access to all the same financial resources an American citizen will have. So that means you can apply for the Fafsa. So that's the government-based funding. So if you're a US citizen or resident, you can apply for Fafsa. And then you may have also some other scholarships available. What you won't have is residency. So if you're looking at public institutions that have a lower in-state tuition for residents, you wouldn't be able to be able to receive that lower rate because you live out of the state. Yes, Kylie, I would say the Youth Ambassadors Program is a great summer program for youth involvement. But I would say work with your guidance counselor at your school to see what kind of opportunities are in your community and what you can make use of. There's some really great websites where you can learn about volunteer opportunities. There's a really good one that's escaping me right now, but you can definitely use some of the resources close to you to find out what kind of volunteer work or community service work you can start working towards. Sanvi asks, where can I find details about universities that don't need SAT scores? So one more time, that's fairtest.org. I'll put that in the chat. Luis, is IB important when you apply? If you are in IB, then yes. I mean, it's considered a pretty rigorous program, and it's definitely one that if you can pursue it, do so. It's definitely looked on favorably. But if you don't have access to IB, don't feel like you're expected to take it. You're only expected to do the program that's available to you in your school. So Sarah, I unfortunately don't have a lot of details about Youth Ambassadors Program yet, which is why I'm just encouraging people to sign up for my email list, which again, if when you registered, if you said yes, you'd like that information, then you'll receive it when I have more details. Right now, unfortunately, we don't know when it's going to be or how many days it's going to be. So I'm not sure what the time commitment is this summer. It's typically a 3-week exchange. Obviously, online, it shouldn't be that extensive. Yes, Skyly, AP is also good. If your school has AP, you can absolutely do that. That's advanced placement. That's an excellent program as well. Priya asks, is community service very important when applying? It's something that if you do, it's really great to see. If you're not somebody who does a lot of community service, then maybe your activity is something else, like if you're highly involved in the arts or sports or something. But it is nice to see when students give back, even if you are in some sort of highly intensive other activity. Usually there's ways to give back to your community. If you are an athlete, you can volunteer as a coach for younger students. If you're in music, you can volunteer to play concerts at a senior citizens home. Like, there's a lot of ways to give back to your community, doing the thing that you love to do. So I would encourage you to think of those things. Again, it's not a requirement, but it is something that they like to see. We have 3 minutes left, so I'll keep answering as many questions as possible. Sherilyn asked, do universities have a quota for Canadian students? So no, universities don't have quotas per se, but you will see them kind of keep consistent numbers over time, particularly when it comes to international students. So like if a university tends to have 10% international students year to year, it means that they probably like to try to keep that number. They might also tell you, their largest numbers of different of students from different populations. It doesn't mean that can't necessarily change from year to year. So I don't want you to worry too much about things like quotas, because obviously that's something that's not in your control whatsoever. And instead really look for universities that have good fit. So Leah's asking about the SAT. So yeah, Leah, the SAT this year, we're not sure how many schools are going to remain test optional. So we're going to use fairtest.org to kind of keep our eye out. You're going to sign up for any prospective student lists at any universities you're interested in to keep an eye on that information. Definitely stay in touch with me. During my SAT boot camp that I do, I'll be giving up-to-date information at that point of where we're at. I think once we're in March and April, we'll have a better sense of where universities are going to be on test optional for the next cycle. Skyly, unfortunately, I don't know of a lot of virtual community involvement for COVID-strict areas, but I would just say that, again, work with your guidance counselor and through the communities that you're already part of, and see what opportunities you can find that way. Woo! Thank you so much for your involvement today, and I can't wait to speak to you, excuse me, more in the future. All right, so I'm looking at my chat and I have, all right, any other last questions? Thank you so much. And please feel free to stay in touch. Like I said, I'm gonna put out that Instagram one more time. Follow me on Instagram, check out those Tuesday tips. Sometimes we do live student events where you can see students who are currently or have recently studied in the US. Lots of great info. You're so welcome. So nice to see so many familiar faces and to meet some new ones. And I look forward to staying in touch. And oh, great. Anybody who's not from Canada, you need to reach out to your local advisor at educationusa.state.gov. That's where you can find your Jenica in your home country. And lastly, if you didn't do it yet, if you're interested, join that education fair that's happening right now. I'm going to go pop back in and see all those students I've been ignoring over the last hour and hopefully answer some questions. All right, I'm going to get off camera and close up the recording. Everybody have a great day.